Work. All right. So just again to reintroduce myself, I am Jamie Nolan. I am President of Intrinsic Management. I work with Sherry. I will be leading the board orientation today. This is a high-level overview of what it means to be a board member and a volunteer leader for a nonprofit. As I understand it, Lauren, there's going to be some more specific training relative to your roles within the chapter on Tuesday. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great. From what I can tell, we've got Daniel Huff, John Harrington, Lauren. I've got Mariah Huntley from our office who's joining us. Is there anybody else on the call that I didn't name?
Rita Trapp is here too.
Hi there.
Hi.
Can everybody see my screen okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Just so everybody knows, this is being recorded so that those people who are unable to join us today can get a copy of this later and listen to the audio. So I'm going to go through the training. There's going to be a lot to cover. It is very high level. Please feel free to chime in at any time with questions. And this should take no more than an hour. So now let's see if I can get it to work. There we go. So this is an overview of the training. We're going to talk about the 10 basic responsibilities of a nonprofit board. We'll talk about the role of a board versus a committee. And we're going to go through legal responsibilities, areas where you might be risk to board liability. We'll talk briefly about Sarbanes-Oxley nonprofits. We are going to discuss just basic board etiquette and protocol. We'll talk about the 7 measures of success. We will talk about the types of nonprofits, C6 versus C3, and then we're going to close with just some high-level stuff on board fundraising and development responsibilities. There is an organization out there called boardsource.org. It's a great resource for all volunteer leaders. I encourage you to check it out at any time. They have what they publish called the 10 basic responsibilities of a board member. And these are really from a very high level what every volunteer leader is responsible for at the board level in working with a nonprofit. So the first one is to determine the organization's mission and purpose. And now being the chapter of a national organization, a lot of times this mission and purpose is driven down to you from headquarters. But in other cases, many chapters like USGBC has done is they will often customize that mission to be more applicable to what they're doing on the ground here at the local level. So it's just important that at board meetings, when you're looking at different programmatic activities, when you're looking at taking on new initiatives, that you're really referencing that mission statement to ensure that the decision that you're making feeds directly into what you're doing. You also want to just make sure that your mission statement articulates who you are, what you do, and why individuals or corporations should support it. And periodically be thinking as a board from a strategic level, are there changes that are going on in the environment around us that may cause us to have to reconsider the adequacy or appropriateness of our mission statement? The second one is to select a chief executive or your executive director. And in this case, you work with, oh, is my slide changing on the screen for all of you? Or are you still seeing the main one?
I'm still seeing the main one.
Me too.
Okay, let me see what's going on here.
There it is.
Is it working now? Okay, I apologize for that. Thank you for pointing that out, Mariah. The second basic responsibility is to select the chief executive, the executive director. And so, several years ago when Sherry was added to the team, we went through the process with the executive committee at the time. And your relationship with Intrinsic is that we get together with the executive committee or the leadership with the president and the president-elect and do an annual performance evaluation with Sherry and goal setting and just kind of evaluating how we continually improve that role and how can we enhance the working relationship between the board and your executive director. So number 2 and number 3 really focus on that relationship between the executive director and the board. Number 4 is ensuring effective organizational planning, and this is really ensuring that comprehensive organizational planning occurs. Certainly for any of you who have participated this past year through the CRA process and really taking a high-level look at who the chapter is and what your initiatives are going to be, you have participated in that comprehensive organizational planning. And it is very important that an organization that's serving on a board that this happens on a relatively frequent basis as things change. And decisions that you make today may or may not be applicable 2 or 3 years from now. So it's important that all board members participate in that, and if they see that this is not happening, that you continue to bring it forward and look at how an organization can continue to be effective and relevant to its members. Questions that you could be asking yourself is, do we have at least one strategic or big picture item on the agenda? I really encourage boards to always put that at the top of the agenda. I think what a lot of organizations do is they put all the usual day-to-day business, approval of the minutes, looking at the financial reports, getting the executive director report. They tend to put that at the top of the agenda. And what happens is you really lose the opportunity to capture the most energy and most focus that you will capture from your board members by putting that at the front. Usually when people get to a meeting, that's when they're going to be the most ready to talk about strategic issues. We really encourage you to put those strategic items at the beginning of the agenda and the more operational business as usual pieces towards the end of the agenda. Other things to be thinking about is, are there changes that are occurring that could affect our revenue stream? Do we have a goal for financial reserves? Do we have a financial strategy in place to achieve those goals? That sort of thing. Number 5 is to monitor and strengthen programs and services. Again, ensuring that all the programs and services that you offer align with your mission, vision, and purpose. It is very, very easy for an organization to kind of get caught in that trap of always doing the same thing because that's what they've always done. And it's really important that a board is constantly looking at, do the programs and services align with what we're trying to accomplish? Is it relevant to our industry and our members and the purpose that we're trying to serve today? Do we know the difference that we're trying to make, and how will we know if we succeed at making that? Again, I do believe that the process that you all went through this past year was a huge step in really taking a good look at what the chapter has to offer and how to become relevant to your industry and your members and your donors. Number 6 is ensuring adequate financial resources and really looking at, how can we have a balanced budget? Do we have dependable revenue streams? What are ways that we can raise private support or corporate donor support? And really understanding that a fundamental role of a board is ensuring those adequate financial resources. Now, it's not to say that you won't sometimes have a negative budget that you're going to pass. You might have new initiatives that you're trying to take on, but it's looking at the trend and the history. Some boards will kind of look only in a year by year on a silo basis, but you really kind of want to look at, okay, where have we been and where are we going? And are we on a positive trend or a negative trend? And really kind of understanding that whole big picture. Certainly you've got the responsibilities of reviewing the financials at each meeting and making sure you're staying on track with budget, but just not losing sight of the fact that each individual month needs to be kind of looked at as the whole picture. Also understanding as a board, do we have a contingency plan if a major source of revenue disappeared? And understanding what the expectations are of the board members and fundraising, which we're going to talk about that very briefly at the end of the presentation. Number 7 is to protect assets and provide financial oversight. A lot of this I covered already, but it's really looking at, understanding what's on the financial statements, understanding maybe why there's budget variances. I strongly encourage all board members, when they get the financials prior to a board meeting, to try to come up with at least one question that you can ask about the financials. And what that's going to do is, number 1, it's going to force you to really try to read and understand what's in those financial statements. And number 2, if you have that question, then probably somebody else is going to have the same question as well. Number 8 is to build a competent board. Every organization's governing board is only as effective as its individual members. And whether this is your first year on the board, your second year on the board, your third year on the board, you want to be constantly looking at, do we have all the skill sets at the table that we would like to have? Is there anybody missing? As we look at recruiting new board members and building new leaders within the organization, is there anybody whose skill set we could really obtain value from that might not be sitting at this table right now? And so even though this is the very start of your new term, you want to be thinking about a year from now. Every meeting that you're at and every activity that you go, you want to be constantly thinking about if there's another skill set that needs to be added to the board in the year ahead. Number 9 is to ensure legal and ethical integrity. A lot of this falls to staff. A lot of this is really managed by Sherry and the team here. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the board of any nonprofit organization is who's ultimately responsible for these things happening. Now, again, as a chapter of a national organization, much of this is covered under their umbrella. But a lot of this is also, we've got state filings, we have tax returns and that sort of thing. It's also ensuring that you're operating the organization in accordance with the bylaws and that you're ensuring transparency and accountability. Certainly, Sherry, that's part of Sherry's role and the team here, but as a board member, be asking those questions. And if you're unsure, it's better to ask and have it clarified. Number 10 is to enhance the organization's public standing. And remember that as a board member, you serve as an ambassador to the organization. You want to know who the designated media spokesperson is. Often it's the president, it might be a PR chair, it might be Sherry. So making sure that the whole board is clear on who is that media spokesperson so that there's always a united, consistent message coming from the chapter to the media if questions are asked. Understanding what the communication plan is and what the guidelines are for board members with regard to responding to media. Anybody have any questions on the 10 basic responsibilities? Okay. So now we're going to talk briefly about the difference between a board and a committee. When you serve on a board, it's really focused on governance, strategy, and deliberation, whereas committees are much more about management. They're more task-driven. It's more rubber stamp. They've been given a budget, and they know that as long as they work within that budget, they can do it. So when you look at governance, what it means to focus on governance is to focus on a lot of the things that I just went over. Understanding the mission, the vision, the purpose. What are the values and principles of our organization? Setting operational policies, conducting financial oversight, ensuring adequate resources. This is financial resources, volunteer resources, staff resources, enhancing the public credibility of the organization, strategic planning, succession planning. The role of the strategic piece of being on the board is really playing out those what-if scenarios. When any kind of a proposal or a decision comes before the board, you really want to play out those what-if scenarios. You want to have an informed opinion. To the degree that information can be collected and distributed prior to a board meeting, it's always best if the board is not hearing about something for the first time at the board meeting and then being asked to make a decision on it. If the board is going to be asked to make a decision on something at a board meeting, it is the best practice to get as much information out or to get, as you can prior to the board meeting so that the board meeting can be used for good discussion, playing out those what-if scenarios, and every board member is ready to vote. If there's any quantitative data around a decision, it's really important to have that in front of you and understand it. Constantly looking at the environment, what's going on in our industry and the economy, will any of that impact the decision that we're going to meet today? And being proactive versus reactive. What I like to say is really the function of the board is be always looking 13 months and out. Let your committees worry about the next 12 months. But the board should be thinking about what's going to happen 13 months and out. The job description for the deliberative piece is, do you understand the issue at hand? Does it pass the ethics test? That old saying of if it smells like a duck and it walks like a duck, it probably is a duck. Really trust that instinct. Ask yourself as you are going through the deliberations, does it fit the mission of the organization? Does it model the values of the organization? Would you do it in your own business? Now we're going to talk about legal responsibilities. There's 3 legal responsibilities that are imposed upon every volunteer leader in any nonprofit. This is also imposed on board members of for-profit companies. They're called duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. duty of care is the duty of due diligence. It is making sure that there is good thought process put into a decision before it is made. It's sort of like just what we talked about. Have you played out the what-if scenarios? Do you understand all the data available? Have you looked at all the options? And it's really making sure that you are exercising reasonable care when making a decision as a steward of your organization. Oh, I handled that stuck in the middle there. I apologize. Duty of care is carried out by attending board meetings, preparing in advance of board meetings, obtaining information before voting to make sound decisions, exercise independent judgment. Don't ever be afraid to be the dissenting vote. It's very important that the board, if there is a dissenting vote on the board, that the rest of the board listens to and understands what that person's reasoning is for that dissension, and really embracing and welcoming a diversity of opinion. I'm sure you've all been at those meetings where everybody goes around the table and says yes, and there's that one person that says no, and I encourage boards to really listen to that. If you often think about the story of the 12 angry jurors, that they're listening to a case about somebody who's being accused of murder, and the jurors go into the deliberation room, and 11 of the jurors right away say the guy is guilty and he should go to death sentence. And there's that one juror that isn't sure. And the other 11 jurors are like, come on, come on, come on, we just want to get this passed. We want to get out of here. He's guilty. Let's get him out of here. And slowly over the course of the day, that one juror presents this argument and that argument that slowly changes the mind of the other jurors around the table. That is the exact reason why you need to listen and embrace opposite opinions and opposite views, because everybody's going to have a different experience that they're bringing to the table, and everybody's going to have heard something different. And so I really encourage everybody to welcome those opinions with open arms. Duty of loyalty is a standard of faithfulness. This is basically avoiding conflict of interest. It's understanding that information that you gain as a board member is to be used for the purpose of that board that you are representing. It is for the benefit of the organization, and that you are not using any of that information for personal gain. Every organization should have a conflict of interest policy, ensuring that you disclose any conflict of interest. Conflict of interest do not have to be a scary thing. It doesn't mean that you have to be kicked off the board. It doesn't mean that the board can't take action on something. It just means that you are being transparent, that you might have a conflict of interest with an issue, and you recuse yourself from voting on that topic. Where conflict of interest can become sticky and where you may get removed from the board or the board may get in trouble is when somebody doesn't disclose that conflict of interest and information is discovered later. And the third one is duty of obedience. And this is really ensuring that you are being faithful to the organization's mission and bylaws, that you are operating in accordance with those. The bylaws are written to be a contract between you and your stakeholders. It's telling your stakeholders, this is how we're going to manage the organization, this is how we're going to govern, this is why we exist. When you start to work outside what is written in your bylaws, that's when you're going to start exposing the organization to liability. So it's really important that board members hold each other accountable. If you feel that a conversation is starting to derail and take you off track or take you away from what your mission purpose is, that you speak up and you bring the organization back to the focus. Duty of obedience is carried out by making sure you understand what's in your governing documents, making sure that your decisions fall within that scope, and ensuring regulatory compliance. A number of things that we have in place for board accountability is a board member roles and responsibilities agreement that is signed annually that outlines that you understand your role as a board member, a conflict of interest policy that is signed annually. The organization also has a whistleblower policy and an antitrust policy, which we will talk a little bit more about antitrust here shortly. Any questions? Okay, moving on. Antitrust is, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but for those of you who may not be familiar with it, antitrust is when a group of competitors get together and they come to some kind of collusion or decision to put somebody else in harm's way where their business is concerned. So, for example, we have a bunch of competitors at the table, and we may decide we aren't happy with vendor ABC. If we all stop giving him or her business, then maybe they will go out of business and we won't have to deal with them anymore. Okay, that would be considered a violation of antitrust. As a nonprofit organization, you are at large risk for that kind of liability. And the reason is, again, especially because you're industry focused, you're going to have competitors that are together. There's going to be opportunities for discussion about pricing. There's going to be opportunities for discussion about vendors that you all use in common. There's going to be opportunities for discussion about price setting. And so when you are at a board meeting, at a committee meeting, when you're at any chapter event, if you hear anybody having conversations that look like any of these quotations on your screen, it's your responsibility as a board member to ask that person to stop the conversation. Because unfortunately, regardless if it has anything to do with USGBC or not, if it's happening at a USGBC event or meeting, then the board and the chapter could be sued for violation of antitrust law. I always stress that if you're at a meeting and you ever hear anything like this happening, if you ask the conversation to stop and it doesn't stop, at that point you exit the room in a very visible way, whether it means you stand up and you knock your chair over, you knock your water over, you yell, whatever it may be, leave your room in a very visible way. Because if the organization were ever to get sued for violation of antitrust, it will get to individual people, and you want to be able to have people sit on that jury stand and go, oh yeah, I remember Lauren left the room, she knocked her water over and fried my computer. So you want to just make sure that your exit is memorable so that your personal liability goes away as a result of that. Different things that we can demonstrate to a court that you as a chapter and as a board have done everything you can to comply with antitrust law is having a policy statement that you review annually, doing a leadership orientation that you're doing right now, understanding that minutes are written to protect the board. Minutes should only reflect actions that are taken at the board. They should not reflect conversations that are being held or the decision-making process. Minutes are admissible in court, so that is why we say it's very important that they are really written in a manner that protects the confidentiality of the discussion behind decisions. Publications, again, you want to be careful about anything that is printed with USGBC, that there never is any slander of a company, that there's never any information in there that may put another business at risk. Your membership standards, which are, I believe, driven by national, you know, again, if somebody feels that they weren't accepted into your chapter as a member, but they met all the membership criteria, they could sue you for antitrust violation, because if their stance is they met the membership standards and you didn't let them in because you didn't like them, then they could say that hurt their business. And meeting agendas, really staying on topic, following the meeting agenda. If any new topics are going to come up, they should be announced at the beginning of the meeting, so that if anybody has to leave the meeting early, they know what topics are going to be brought up, so they can't come back later and say, after I left the meeting, they decided to talk about X, Y, and Z. As I mentioned, if necessary, walk away. And if you're ever unsure whether or not something could be an antitrust violation, check with legal counsel. Working with Intrinsic, we have access to legal counsel that we get free consultations with every month for issues that our clients might face, that if we just need to call them up and say, hey, we just have this question about something our client is facing, we have access to that, and so please utilize us for that. Any questions about that before I move on? Okay. The IRS Form 990 disclosure, this is the document that is required under law to be made open for public inspection. There's a little bit of a misnomer out there that people think when they say, well, you're a nonprofit, your financials are public. That is true about the 990. It is not law that somebody could walk into our office and say, open up your QuickBooks file, we want to look at them. That would be board policy. The board could say yes or no about whether or not one of your donors could come in and ask for that information. The only information that is required under law to disclose is the Form 990, and that is your annual tax return. If somebody requests it from you as a board member, you are required to produce it the same day. You can always get that from our office. Call Sherry, call Kim, call myself. A lot of people will just get it now. There's a website called guidestar.org. Most nonprofits have their 990 on there. If somebody asks for a copy of the 990 in writing, you have 30 days to supply it. Contributors do not have to be made public. Again, that is board policy. There's a lot of people out there that will scream and shout and say, you're a nonprofit and you're not making your contributors public. That is board policy. That is not required under law. There are penalties for not producing the 990, as you can see, and they can get quite steep. Luckily, yours is widely available. It's easily accessible. We just need to know that somebody's requesting it. Agendas and minutes, I kind of touched on this already, but just making sure that you follow the agenda, you stay on topic. Recording who's at the meeting, where it takes place. I also encourage my staff, if they're taking the minutes, if somebody leaves the meeting early, make a note, an italicized note in the minutes at the spot where that person left, so that everybody knows that person was gone when these other topics were discussed. It protects both the board and the person that left the meeting. As I mentioned earlier, do not record side conversations, always avoiding slander, and just remembering the confidentiality information. The discussion that happens in the boardroom stays in the boardroom. Once you leave the boardroom, you should have a united front about the decisions that were made and only discuss the outcome. Going back to what I said earlier about the 12 angry jurors, that same concept of having that simultaneous deliberation is why email voting is a very difficult vote to take. The only way email voting is legal is if you get 100% response from the board and it's completely unanimous. And that goes directly back to that example I gave earlier, that if there's one person who doesn't vote, now you don't know what their thoughts are. And if there's one dissension, over email, you're missing the opportunity to engage in discussion with that person about why they don't agree. So we discourage email voting unless it's just a formality for something that you know is going to be approved. And you have to make sure you get 100% response from the board and it's unanimous. If there is a decision that needs to be made between board meetings, we recommend just pulling together a quick conference call or a video meeting so that you can have that discussion. Any questions? All right. I'm just going to give you some examples of risks and exposures to boards that could put the board at risk for lawsuits. A lot of these I've covered already, but not disclosing conflict of interests, producing fraudulent reports, breaching contracts with a vendor, violations of your provisions of articles or bylaws. These are allegations of wrongful acts that a lot of nonprofit boards can get sued for. Allegations of financial mismanagement is certainly huge. If you have a stakeholder, whether it's a member or a donor or a sponsor, who feels that the board has really mismanaged the finances, the board will be held responsible. We as Intrinsic have taken over management of organizations where the previous staff or the previous management company, whatever it may be, was really relied upon to do all the financials. And the board was not actively engaged, did not regularly review the financials, and got in trouble by their stakeholders for financial mismanagement. And so that is why we really strongly encourage, to my earlier point, that every board member review the financials and try to come up with at least one question that you can ask to help you understand what's in those financials and how the money is being spent. Because at the end of the day, the responsibility is of the board and not of the staff. The staff can be held liable, but the ultimate responsibility in the court's eyes is that board of directors. Allegations of negligence, continual absence from a meeting is huge. If you are unable to attend 80% of the meetings, then we request that you reconsider your position on the board. You could put yourself at risk and you could put the whole board at risk by being continually absent from meetings. You need that continuity, that discussion, that understanding on moving an organization forward, and it's a fundamental responsibility of being a board member. Organizations that just sign away on documents without understanding what the information is in it could end up resulting in negligence, failure to detect and stop embezzlement, shirking responsibility. The court will never accept ignorance as justification. They also won't say, if you were to get on the jury stand and say, well, I wasn't the treasurer and that's the treasurer's responsibility, the court won't accept it. They'll say, no, it's the whole board's responsibility to understand these things. We do have directors and officers insurance. Directors and officers insurance will help pay defense claims if you are accused of some kind of a wrongful act, such as some of those that were listed. The results of the lawsuit may or may not be covered by the D&O insurance. It depends on the policy. It depends on what the lawsuit is. It depends on what the outcome is. So if there is a settlement, that may come out of the chapter's financial standing. But if there is no settlement, most of those defense costs should be covered by the D&O insurance. Also on that point, a lot of homeowners policies now are asking if you serve on the board of a nonprofit, and when you answer yes, they may ask you for a copy of the D&O policy of the nonprofit that you are serving for. And if you ever need a copy of that, you can call our office and we can get that for you. Just briefly, Sarbanes-Oxley, that came, it was about 10 years ago after the Enron scandal. It's known as the American Corporate Accountability Act. It was enforced for publicly traded companies, but there are many, many states that are enforcing this on nonprofits. What the IRS has done is they have changed the Form 990, which is the tax return, to integrate a lot of the Sarbanes-Oxley requirements into a questionnaire that's now on the 990. There are two criminal provisions that do apply to nonprofits, that is having a record-keeping retention policy and whistleblower protection, both of which your chapter does have. And then the other piece is that on the 990, they now ask all these questions. And actually, this is just a snapshot. There's an entire page of questions. I think it's about 30 questions that they ask, and they're all governance focused about whether or not your organization has these various policies in place. Does the board review the 990 before filing? Does the organization make its reports and policies available to the public? At the end of the day, if you as an organization were to say no to any of these questions, you're not doing anything wrong. Right now, you're not doing anything wrong because there is no legal requirement. But what they're doing is that the IRS is basically putting in front of you, look, these are the best practices, and we know that you know if you say no to any of these things, it's going to be a red flag. So we are always working with our boards to make sure that they are able to say yes to all, most if not all of those questions on the 990. And from, I'm pretty sure that the chapter right now can say yes to all these questions. I haven't looked at your 990 recently, but we really work hard with all our clients here to make sure that they have all these policies in place. Just basic board etiquette and protocol, I've really talked about these already in some form, so I won't go through them again. But here's just kind of a recap, ensuring that you are in an open mind to contrary views, you know what's going on, you stay informed about association business, you support the majority decisions, and you respect the deliberative nature of the board process. You don't ever want to go out there and say, well, I'm a board member of USGBC, so I'm approving this or that. Does anybody have any questions before I kind of take a different direction for a few minutes? Okay. There is a study out there called The 7 Measures of Success, and if any of you have read the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, this book was written with the help of Jim Collins, but it was written for nonprofits and associations and to really understand what makes organizations successful. And so I'm just giving you the very, very high-level overview of the results of this because I think it's a good thing for all board members to keep in their back of their mind as they're going through their year. But basically, they took 18 organizations and looked at these 11 different areas, from vision to use of technology, products and services, financial health, public policy, to really identify who were those great organizations and what made them great. They had this basic criteria that the organization had to be in operation for at least 20 years. They finished more years in the black than the red, that they had more than one CEO during that study period, and that they exhibited the ability to retain members, donors, and market share during the study period. These are the 9 organizations that became under that study. And the results were broken into 3 areas. The first area was that these organizations had a commitment to purpose. They had a strong customer service culture. They understood that every person that they interacted with was a potential donor, a potential member, a potential sponsor, a potential volunteer, a potential board member. And so they really, with every interaction that they had a very strong customer service sense about that. The second one is that they ensured all their products and services aligned with their missions, and that they never did anything for the sake of always doing it, that they constantly evaluated whether or not this product and service aligned with their mission. The second area was a commitment to analysis and feedback. These great organizations were very data-driven. They were constantly looking at data, collecting data, and then utilizing that data. But in addition, the board members and the staff had ongoing dialogue and engagement with their stakeholders about their experience, about their feedback, and they did something with it. I'm sure many of you have been a part of organizations where you've collected data and then done nothing with it. But it's really ensuring that you're collecting that data, you're engaging in conversation, and you're constantly evaluating how you can improve your process. And then using your CEO as a broker of ideas. You know, using Sherry as a broker of ideas, using Intrinsic as a broker of ideas. We work with 18 associations at Intrinsic, so certainly we can bring ideas of what other organizations are doing. So really seeking out what have other people done and not necessarily always having to reinvent the wheel. And then the third piece is a commitment to action. Organizational adaptability. Again, what you did this last year with the whole CRA process was a great example of really adapting to the changing times, the changing environment, and ensuring that you are remaining relevant as an organization to your stakeholders. And the last one is alliance building. Remembering that there is strength in numbers, that there are a number of organizations that are doing similar programs and services that have similar desires of outcomes, and looking for those opportunities for partnering with other organizations and building those alliances to have a stronger impact. So this is just a snapshot of the book. If anybody's interested in reading more about it, we have a few copies here that you can borrow to review. It's a pretty quick read, but it's really good information to just kind of have in the back of your mind as you go throughout the year and you're looking at how you can continue to move the organization forward. So the last thing I'm going to touch on just briefly is board fundraising and development. And, you know, I know that this is going to be talked about in more detail on Tuesday, but Sherry asked me to just kind of give a high-level overview. There are many, many different types of nonprofits, but the two most common in sort of this business environment is a 501c6 and 501c3. Many dues-paying organizations that you might belong to are going to be a 501c6. And, you know, so if any of you are members of IFMA or IIDA or NIOP, you know, those are trade associations that are 501c6s. They are exempt from federal income tax, but they are not charities. So sponsorships to those organizations are not charitable deductions. They're ordinary business expenses. They are not exempt from sales tax. They are not a write-off on your personal tax return. The focus of those organizations is really networking and business development. USGBC is unique because it is a 501c3, and even though it's structured much like a business league because it's people within the same industry coming together and you have dues-paying members, you fall under that 501c3 category of being a charitable organization because your focus is on education and information dissemination. As a result of that, the IRS said, okay, you can be a charitable organization, and that means people who donate to your organization can take a charitable deduction. That gives you a huge advantage for raising money because now you can go out to people and say, donate to our organization. Let us be your charity of choice. Now, we have applied for sales tax exemption with Minnesota and thus far have not succeeded at obtaining it. That is a state-based decision. Not all 501c3s qualify for it. We will continue to apply for it every year until hopefully we get granted a sales tax exemption, but we are exempt from federal income tax. So there's staff fundraising and development responsibilities, and there's board fundraising and development responsibilities. Really, the staff fundraising responsibilities is, preparing a fundraising plan with specific goals, implementing fundraising techniques, helping to develop donor cultivation, handling all the administrative tasks, providing regular reports to the board, and maintaining the stewardship of the donors. Now, in this case, there's a lot of collaboration with the board that we are looking for, that Sherry is looking for, that is needed to help expand our donor base. A lot of what Sherry is going to be looking for, and again, she's going to go into more detail in this on Tuesday, is helping to identify those potential donors, participating in face-to-face meetings, helping to foster communication with donors, supporting the organization's fundraising efforts with your own personal annual gift, having this be a topic of discussion at every board meeting and monitoring the performance of fundraising results. Is there that 100% board participation? And then at the end of the day, it's the board's responsibility to ensure that the funds that are raised are used in accordance with legal requirements and any donor restrictions. That is really basic, high level. Sherry did say that there was going to be more discussion about this on Tuesday, but I just kind of wanted to set the stage so that when you have that discussion on Tuesday, you've got a little bit of background. Just questions that you might want to be asking if you're not clear about when you have your meeting is, are you clear on what the difference is between the board and the staff? Are you routinely providing staff with information on prospective donors? Are you assisting staff in soliciting qualified prospects? You work effectively with staff on donor cultivation and solicitation? And how does the board actively participate in stewardship of the organization's donors? So these are things that Sherry will go over on Tuesday, but just make sure that you are clear on these things by the time you leave that meeting. That wraps up our training. Does anybody have any questions, anything I didn't cover, any clarification on anything I covered?
Jamie, this is Rita.
Yeah.
I thought it was really good. Thank you very much for putting it together. I am wondering if it's available somehow?
Yes.
Because I only retain a little bit at a time.
Yep, absolutely. Kim is going to be putting Kim is going to be putting a PDF version of this PowerPoint on the board portal.
Okay, great. That's what I figured, but I wanted to make sure because I was, listening to it all, but it was a lot to take in especially since I'm new.
Absolutely. Yep.
Because it's a lot right away.
Yes, it is. Yep, absolutely. And I am always available for questions if you ever have any questions at any time. Myself, Mariah Huntley in our office, she's another certified association executive. She's always available for questions. And then certainly you can ask Sherry. And if Sherry doesn't know the answer, she'll come find one of us. So thank you very much, everybody, for all of your time. We will get a copy of this PDF out on the board portal. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact us.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Have a great evening.